it's a lot, isn't it? The world, I mean.
Right.
Just every time you turn on the news, it's just, oof, suffering, injustice, you name it. Makes you wonder if there's anything we can learn from, well, from older traditions, which is why we're diving into Christianity today,
Right, right.
looking at its perspective on good versus evil, you know?
Yeah, and it's a perspective that has been, centuries in the making. We're not talking about some like new trend here. It's always been there. This whole idea of trying to understand evil in a world created by a God that's supposed to be all loving.
Exactly. So much depth to uncover. And speaking of depth, can we talk about the Trinity? I gotta admit, that one always throws me for a loop. One God, but three persons. How does that even work? It's a head scratcher for sure.
Instead of thinking of it like a puzzle you got to solve, try thinking of it like a lens. The Trinity, with the Father, Son, and Holy Spirit, it's not about chopping God up into little pieces, right?
Right, right.
It's more about like wrapping our heads around the fullness of God, how God acts in the world and all that. So you've got the Father, who often represents, like creation and love and this ultimate authority.
Okay, I'm following.
Then there's Jesus, the Son. He embodies like God choosing to experience being human, the joys, the sorrows, the whole shebang. And ultimately, he offers a way for us to reconnect with God.
And the Holy Spirit, what's its role in all of this?
Think of the Holy Spirit as the active presence of God in the world and in our lives too. You know those moments when you feel a nudge towards compassion or a spark of hope out of nowhere, or even that gut feeling telling you what's right?
Okay, yeah.
That's the Holy Spirit at work.
I like that, the lens analogy. So less about putting God in boxes and more about seeing how these aspects of God all work together. But how does that lens help us make sense of all the chaos in the world? The evil, the suffering. We can't ignore that stuff.
And that's where it gets really interesting. You've got this idea of God being all-powerful, perfectly good, and then you look around and, well, things are messed up, right?
Right.
But here's the thing. Christianity doesn't try to sweep that tension under the rug. It acknowledges it.
So it's not about coming up with excuses for suffering. It's about saying, yep, that's real, and it exists even though there's this loving God.
Yeah, you got it. And it's in those tough questions and the wrestling with those ideas that the Christian worldview starts to make more sense. It's a journey, not a destination, with all the answers neatly packaged. And that brings us to Jesus, His story, even though it happened like 2,000 years ago, it's not just some ancient history lesson. It connects with the struggles we face today, even now.
That's where I get tripped up, to be honest. I mean, how can someone who lived so long ago in such a different world speak to what we're dealing with now? It feels disconnected.
It's not about like copying his every move. It's more about understanding the why behind his teachings, the principles he lived by. Like, take his radical idea of loving your enemies. Think about applying that to the conflicts we see in the world today. Or even like, a heated political debate with your family.
No, tell me about it.
Or how about forgiveness? And I don't mean letting people off the hook, but that idea of breaking free from resentment and bitterness, it can be really powerful, These principles, they're timeless. They can really change us and the world around us.
It's like he's offering like a whole new way of looking at things, instead of conflict and division being the norm,
Totally. And it's not about accepting injustice either. Jesus was really clear about standing up to those in power who were, taking advantage of others or pushing people around.
Right, totally. Which brings us back to, well, the big question that got us started in the first place. If there's a loving God, like we've been talking about, then why is there so much evil in the world? The stuff you shared about the devil really digs into that.
Yeah.
And I gotta say, I've always struggled with that whole, I don't know, it's always felt kind of mythological to me,
Yeah.
Like something out of a storybook almost.
It's easy to picture like a cartoon devil, right? With the horns and the pitchfork.
Yeah.
But the way Christians see it, the devil or Satan isn't really about this one scary figure. It's more about understanding how evil actually works. You can think of it like a force that messes with God's plans. It tempts us, pushes us toward being selfish, greedy, all those things that cause pain and break us apart.
So it's less about a literal devil on your shoulder and more about recognizing the patterns of evil, right? How they show up in the world, even in ourselves sometimes.
Exactly. We can't ignore those patterns. And Christianity gets that, acknowledges how destructive evil can be. But it also gives us this powerful message of hope. It reminds us that evil doesn't win in the end. The belief is that through Jesus, evil's defeated. It's done.
That's encouraging, especially when it feels like the world is just, I don't know, drowning in bad news.
Yeah.
But then it makes me wonder, if evil's already lost, what are we supposed to be doing in the meantime? Does that make sense? Like,
Oh,
what's the role of the church of Christians in all of this?
that's a great question and a big one. The church, you see, is meant to be a force for good in the world, you know? It's about taking those big concepts we've been discussing, love, forgiveness, hope, and putting them into action, making them real.
Okay, so it's not just about showing up on Sundays. It's about living those beliefs out, right? Like
Yeah.
letting them affect how we treat other people, how we move through the world.
You got it. It means recognizing that everyone has value, that everyone deserves to be treated with dignity. It's about caring for those who need it, feeding the hungry, being a voice for the voiceless. Basically, it's about trying to be like Jesus in our everyday lives, showing God's love, showing compassion in practical ways.
Which honestly can be kind of overwhelming. You know what I mean? The world's problems are huge. And it's easy to get stuck thinking, what can I, like, one person actually do?
Mhm.
It's like you're frozen, because the problems are massive. How can one person even begin to?
Mm.
I don't know. It's easy to just throw your hands up in the air.
Yeah, I get it. But think about it this way. Have you ever had someone, do something small, like a gesture of kindness or something, that ended up having a huge impact on you?
Totally.
Or maybe there was a time when you spoke up for someone who was being treated unfairly, even if it was a little scary. Those small things, they can snowball, create these ripples of light that push back against all the darkness in ways we can't always see in the moment.
So it's about choosing to be hopeful rather than giving up, choosing action over, I don't know, despair.
Exactly. And that connects to something we haven't really talked about yet, this idea of the end times. It gets painted as this big, dramatic, like apocalyptic thing. But at its heart, it's really about this very human longing for a world where good wins out in the end.
I get that. But I think whenever I hear people talk about the end times, it seems to make people scared or like they check out from the world. It's like,
Yeah.
if it's all going to end anyway, why bother?
Yeah, that's a common reaction. It makes sense. But the thing is, the way Christians view the end times, it's not about, ditching this world for some perfect afterlife. It's about this powerful affirmation that ultimately justice is going to win out.
Yeah.
That even if we don't see it fully realized in our lifetime, God's working toward a reality where suffering and evil, they don't exist anymore.
So it's less about knowing exactly how and when the world ends and more about holding on to that hope, that kind of hope for a better future, and letting that hope inspire us to act now in the present.
That's it. It's about living in that space, that tension of knowing we might not have all the answers, but still working towards making the world a better place. Knowing that even our small efforts, they contribute to this bigger story of redemption and healing.
It's interesting to think of the end times as, I don't know, motivating almost. Like it's a reminder that our choices, our actions, they matter, not just for us, but for the world around us and the future we're all moving towards.
It's a powerful message. And, the Christian faith, it doesn't pretend to have all the answers about evil and suffering. It invites us to be part of a story that's still being written. We get to be co-authors in a way, bringing more light and healing into the world. And that's something we all have the power to do.
This has been, wow, a lot to take in. We started with a simple question, how Christianity sees good versus evil, and it's opened up all these different ideas about God, humanity, our place in it all. What a journey.
It's like any good journey, right? That
Yeah.
it leaves you with more questions, maybe. But it also helps you understand those questions in a deeper way.
For sure. And, one of the things that's really stuck with me throughout this conversation is like the action part of it all. Christianity, at its core, it's not passive. It's about doing something. We're called to be part of the solution, to live out those values we've been talking about, love, compassion, justice, every single day.
Yeah, it's a call that's been ringing out for centuries. And it reminds us that even the smallest acts of love, of kindness, can have a huge impact. They really can change the world.
And on that note, as we wrap up this deep dive, is there one thought you'd want to leave our listeners with today?
As you go about your day, notice the good and the bad, all of it. And ask yourself this. What's one small act of love or justice that I can offer today? Maybe it's a gesture of kindness. Maybe it's choosing to speak up for what's right, even if it feels hard. You might be surprised by how much light you can bring into the world just by doing that one small thing.